If you're in love with horses, then you and I are the same. Um, we've been a hostage to horses since the day we were born. We were born as a horse lover. Many of us could reach through a photo album and see memories of us wearing boots, hats, and riding stick horses. Meanwhile, our peers were wearing cowboy hats, stethoscopes, and looking to the stars. We were dreaming of dapple grays, winged horses, and riding the range. And finally, time gave way to our dreams, and we found ourselves face to face with two brown eyes, a muzzle, mane, and a tail.
Welcome to Barns and Farms with a side of cornbread. This is Shayne Hollifield. If it lives on a farm, sleeps in a barn, or loves Southern food, then we're going to talk about
it. There's always a story behind every story. And I think that when you're really dealing with the personalities of horses and human beings, and that's what I do, it's my passion, is to bring the two of them together. You really have to understand the depth of the personalities of each of them in order to try to build that unity.
So welcome to episode 7 of Barns and Farms with a side of cornbread. Today we're talking with Pete Dillingham of Harmony Mountain Equines, and this episode is going to be called Harmony Over Force, and we're talking about natural horsemanship versus traditional horsemanship.
I think my love with horses started when I was a youth, when I can see instances when I was just drawn to them, but never really had the opportunity to pursue that interest. And so as I grew up, I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. And I chose to go to college and enter into the art of communication, and eventually went into broadcasting. And it was during that period of time, when I was first there, that I started to realize my passion for horses. I was working at a radio station part-time, and they offered me an opportunity to sell radio time. And so I chose to do that. I needed the extra money anyway. So as I stepped out the door, I had two choices. One choice was to go to the left, go into the city, knock on doors, and the other choice was go out into the rural area. And I had, as a youth, had tried to sell Encyclopedia Britannicas, and that is a dead end street. And so I chose to go out in the rural area, but I shamed myself into thinking, okay, the first commercial sign that I see, I'm going to stop there and try to sell them radio time. And the first commercial sign was a horseback riding stable. Got there around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They invited me for dinner, and at 11 o'clock that night, I had a signed contract. And just as I was leaving, we've got these National Geographic pictures in our mind. This is one that sticks with me for a lifetime. I was on the opposite side of the screen door, leaving, and the owner, who eventually became my mentor, said, if you're going to talk about horses on radio, at least you've got to come out and ride a horse. Come out next Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday, and we'll put you up on a horse. And so I came out the following week, and I was wearing Bermuda shorts and sandals, and put me on a horse. Her name was Queenie, and as I look back on Queenie, she was probably one of the ugliest horses I've ever seen. I thought she was beautiful. And he gave me instructions and just sent me out on the trail. I think one of the things that I never realized at that point in my life is that each of us has a passion for something. We're gifted at something. And I just never realized that it was necessary to find that gift if you're going to be happy. It was there in the center that I did. I remembered the spot. All of a sudden I realized I wanted to be a horse person. And that started and ignited my love for horses. Years later, I ended up owning that same riding stable. It was big. eventually we had 40 rent head and a pasture of 70 horses, some of them horse-drawn carriage horses, some of them borders horses. But that launched me into my professional years as a horse person.
Was there a specific horse or a moment that pulled you towards the path of natural horsemanship?
Eventually, with those riding stables, that riding stable, I sold it through a series of godsends for a profit, and started another management of another riding stable. And in that process, I started to evolve a little bit more to training. That was really my passion. My whole goal in the development of riding stables was, number one, I wanted them to be more than just a Ferris wheel, a fun park for people. I wanted them to be educational centers. The second goal that I really had for that was to make sure that the horses were always fat and healthy. Riding stables had such a bad reputation. I didn't want people thinking that way. And those two building blocks became a pyramid of, I think, success in both riding stables. And so the programs that I was able to create, this educational program, started right basically from putting somebody in the saddle and telling them how to ride, but not just letting them sit in the saddle, but explaining to them how to communicate to a horse, so that the more they knew about it, the more they enjoyed it, and the more they enjoyed it, the more they came. Eventually, I was teaching the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, high school PE classes, and community college classes. And so it really did become an educational center in both situations. It was an educational center. And eventually my love started to surface more, and that was developing not just people with horses, but developing horses with people. There was a problem, though, that I had. I was stuck in traditional horsemanship. And there were times that I wondered if I was a slave driver, because I was pushing these horses. I was always humane, but I missed my first real attraction to horses, and that was to build a relationship with a horse. And so I didn't particularly like myself. And there was another bad thing that was happening to me in that process. I became so adept at becoming a good business person and a fairly good teacher that I began to think that I knew everything. And when you get to a point with a passion, let's say you have, when you think you know everything and you realize there's nothing more to learn, you start to lose that sense of passion. Especially if you don't particularly like yourself, in the sense that you feel like you're a slave driver and you're missing the whole point of why you got in the horses, and that was you loved them. And about that time, while I was working with people and I was kind of sidelined working with training horses, someone encouraged me to go into natural horsemanship. I kind of rejected the idea, because again, I felt that I knew everything. There was nothing more that I could learn. But they kept pestering me and my wife, and eventually we decided to at least explore it. And when I did, I started resenting natural horsemanship, because in so many ways it went just the opposite way of what traditional horsemanship is. Natural horsemanship is a passive way of communicating with a horse. Traditional horsemanship forces horses to do what you want them to do. One of the major differences between natural horsemanship and traditional horsemanship is with natural horsemanship, you give horses choices. If you could envision in your mind a box with one opening, that box is something you're trying to develop or teach a horse. And in doing so, you're giving the horse to hit every single parameter of that box. And ultimately, they will go through the opening of the box. That opening is what you want them to want to do, versus traditional horsemanship would force that horse through that opening. In human terms, it would be like two different bosses. One boss rules with an iron fist, and if you're not here by 8 o'clock in the morning, you're fired. The other boss says, you know what? Our business starts at 8 o'clock. If you can't be here by 8 o'clock, we've got to discover or decide what your options are. One boss, the one that rules with an iron fist after an employee is given 100% effort, will say, it's about time you did your job right. The other boss will say, you know what? I just don't know how I could have gotten by without you today. And I really appreciate it. The person that works for that first boss, they're going to look for the first exit out of the job they can get, even if it's a pay cut. The other person, they work for more than a paycheck. They will work for the esprit de corps, the feeling of an identity, the feeling of belonging. And that's the way it is with horses. If you force them to do something, then they're going to look for the first escape they can have. If you can develop them to do what you want them to do, then all of a sudden they want to work for you. But what you are really doing is starting to build a bond of respect that comes from not fear, but comes from compassion and understanding. And so I think that's one of the differences between natural horsemanship and traditional horsemanship is we give people choices, or horses choices. And when you're given that choice, you have ownership over the decision-making process. When you have ownership over the decision-making process, then it becomes a better choice for you. I think natural horsemanship, much of natural horsemanship, has lived for thousands of years. It just has never surfaced before now. Years ago, thousands of years ago, one person might have had an idea of what natural horsemanship was, but he might not have had the ability to express it. It was just intuitive, because for centuries, there were people who were passionate, had a God-given horse-loving gift, and yet were told to rule with an iron fist. Sometimes they were told that because there was fear involved. I don't want you hurt, so use this heavy bit and beat that horse to death when you want it to do something. Don't let it act like it wants to do. Don't let it make its own decisions. You force it to do what you want it to do. And so people felt that, even the horse lovers felt that they had to survive just by being cruel or heavy-handed. And I feel a lot of sadness for those people, because if they were like me, they didn't want to be slave drivers. Then there were other people that just treated horses just like they do vehicles. They had to change the oil once in a while, but doggone it all, if something was wrong, they had to tweak it and make sure that that horse was on the road and carrying them to town or plowing the fields.
All right. How do you start building trust with a horse that's fearful or reactive? I think that's a good question that people want to know your thoughts on.
I think there's a variety of answers to that. The first is each horse has a unique personality, and you have to start to identify that personality. You have to find out who that horse is. That's one of the gifts of natural horsemanship, is it starts working with horses on the ground, using exercises that not only define boundaries, but also to explore their weaknesses as well as their strengths. In doing so, by desensitizing horses or defining boundaries like respect my space or ground tying or circling at a certain speed, by doing things like that, or by desensitizing them to leaf blowers or things that are not natural to them, like whips, desensitizing them to whips, you start to build that relationship. Because if you're doing it right, you're going to accomplish three things with ground games. First of all, you define the boundaries. The second thing is you start to identify where their personalities are. And thirdly, you start to build the bond, because when you're building that bond, what you're doing is not just using negative reinforcement, but you're using positive reinforcement. And when that light turns on, when that brat decides not to be a brat, you can throw your arms around them and tell them they're the best horse in the world. Or when that horse overcomes its fear, you can tell them they're the best horse in the world. If you think about that with horses, that's, in a way, it's foreign to them. In their own herd, they don't necessarily have positive reinforcement. They have friendships, there's no doubt about that. But their form of positive reinforcement sometimes is relief. It's some horse pushes another horse around until all of a sudden that horse bends to the first horse, dominant horse's will, and all of a sudden it's relief. They take it away from them. But there's very little bit of showing affection. I mean, they'll call for each other, yes, and they have a desire for companionship, and sometimes they'll groom each other, and that's cool too. And that is a form, I guess, of mild form of positive reinforcement. But there's nothing big in their life that says you're the best horse in the world. And when us human beings do that, we suddenly introduce that idea to them. They don't naturally come to human beings. They're not like a dog or a cat that's been at our heels for thousands of years. You've never seen a horse that came out of the desert and said, "Come on, man, throw a saddle on me. Let's go riding." And so it's just not natural for them to be in with us and to want to be a part of our life. And yet the difference between, let's say, traditional horsemanship and natural horsemanship, one of the differences is that we can give them encouragement and positive reinforcement, and they can learn to strive for that. So that's an advantage to natural horsemanship.
Okay. What do you believe is the biggest misconception riders and owners have about their horses?
I don't think that people realize how sensitive horses really are and how aware of you that they are. In fact, maybe it's motivated out of fear, and sometimes maybe it's motivated out of lack of knowledge, but they don't realize how to become softer, 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 softer in their communication to the horse. It's like the teacher that's always hollering in the classroom. If the teacher is always hollering in the classroom, eventually the student's going to kind of zone out. But if the teacher can start to talk softly in the classroom and then elevate its intonation, then they have more of the attention of those students. And we just don't realize how subtle our movements can be. Even, I honestly believe sometimes the look in our eyes, how subtle that can be in the way of communicating to a horse. Certainly our voice. Let me give you an example of something like that.
Okay.
You're teaching a horse to ground tie. And one of the things that a horse will try to do and to avoid ground tying is to drop its head and look at the ground. That comes from the grazing, because when they're out grazing, they drop their head, they look at the ground, and they munch a bunch and walk on. Drop their head, look at the ground, munch a bunch and walk on. But if you're training the horse to ground tie, and let's say you're in an area where there's no munch a bunch, when they're dropping their head, they're thinking of moving on. And so when that horse decides it wants to move on, one of the cues that you can give a horse is a verbal cue. Hey, after the horse acknowledges that and understands what that is, then all of a sudden it isn't hey, it's hey. And then all of a sudden it's hey. And suddenly it's hey. And so in the softest voice, you've given that horse a little bit of communication about what it's doing. I think knowledge is empowering, and the problem that most people have is they just don't understand the clockwork of a horse's mind. First of all, they've got to understand a horse is extremely intelligent, but they're not intelligent in the ways that you and I look at intelligence, not with IQ. Their intelligence in every horse surfaces in two specific areas. I don't care how different the horses are, personalities, every horse has two areas that they're extremely intelligent on. One is their ability to pick up a pattern. And if you think about patterns, patterns have been a survival technique for horses for millions of years, because if they could identify seasonal grazing grounds, paths that they have to travel to get from point A to B where predators weren't, where water holes were, then suddenly these patterns became a survival technique to them, and they needed those just to be comfortable and happy. The second thing that they have is a huge memory. I remember one time I had a herd of about almost 65 to 70 head of horses, and I bought this new horse in. Her name was Honey. And when you introduce horses to a large herd, there's a lot of social interest. And she walked out in the pasture where this big herd of horses were, and everybody started to come up and say, who are you? Who are you? And who's the boss here? And all that kind of stuff. In the mix of this group, there was a draft horse. Her name was Gretel. She kind of moseyed her way in there. Now, Gretel was a dominant horse in that pasture, but she was not the type of horse that really tried to show everybody how tough she was. She just slowly, everybody started to realize that she was dominant. She didn't try to really wear it on her sleeve. Anyway, she wandered or moseyed into that crowd of horses, and she came up to Honey. They put their noses together, and this sometimes you see this happening, not very often. And then she walked away, and they were friends, and Honey followed her. There was no fireworks, no nothing. About 3 years later, somebody was looking for a horse to buy for their kids, and they bought Honey. And then about 2 years later, they ran into some financial problems. And so they asked me if I wanted to buy Honey back, and I said, sure. And I bought Honey back, put her in the herd, and she walked out in the herd, and she and Gretel met, and they walked away.
That's awesome.
What a great memory.
That is a great memory. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That.
I think my point is this. There's aspects about horses that we have to understand. Number one, their intelligence. They understand patterns quickly, and they remember those patterns. That's important to know, because when you're teaching a horse, if you're teaching them right, if you present a pattern to them, within 2 to 3 times they've picked up that pattern. And if you know that's the case, then it helps you to eliminate a gray zone. And the second thing you need to know about a horse is their learning patterns. The first thing that happens when they're a horse, because they're always looking for a pattern, they're insecure. They're looking for something that's predictable, just like a pattern. And so when they're introduced to something new, they're saying, what's going on here? what is happening, and you have their fullest attention. And as you start to teach them something, like through a pattern, all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, I got it. I understand what you're telling me. But then there's a third stage of their learning. The first stage says, what's going on? Second stage is, oh, yeah, I got it. Third stage says, you know what? I got it, but it's not in my contract. And you have to understand that, because that too helps you not create a gray zone of uncertainty. The last thing you need to know about when you're developing horses is you have to develop them in patterns that are palatable and understandable. You're not trying to scare the pewaddles out of a horse. You're trying to help them understand how to get to point A and point B. Now, if you know those three things, their intelligence, that they have to they learn quickly by using patterns, and they're going to give you some waves of resistance. Those are the things that help you when that brat decides to surface, to know how to treat a brat, or to treat a horse that says, I don't know, or a horse that says, I'm afraid. If you could see there's a fault, another fault that people have with horses, it would be that when a horse gives them resistance, they automatically assume the horse is being a brat. They don't go to the source of the problem. They don't identify whether the horse is afraid, whether the horse just doesn't understand, or whether it's a brat, because each of those things require a different approach to solving that problem.
Absolutely.
There's a rule in horsemanship that goes like this. If a horse figuratively gives you 10 ounces of pressure, you go to 11. This is what they do in their herd. If they go to 11, you go to 12. If they go to 12, you go to 13. If they back off, you back off. However, the mistake that most people will make is this. The horse gives them 10 ounces of pressure. The human being says, yeah, I can handle 10 ounces of pressure. That's a stalemate. Horses absolutely love stalemates, and I can circle back to that in a minute. So then the horse says, well, what do you think about 11 ounces? Human being says, yeah, I can do 11 ounces. Horse says, what about 12?
The horse is training the person at this point.
Yeah, and then when a human being says, you know what, I must be doing something wrong, the horse then says, gotcha.
Have you ever had a horse teach you something unexpected?
All the time. I think there are milestones in learning. I think one of the most monumental milestones in my life working training with horses is when I learned not to lose my temper. I got into an argument with a horse, and they started to escalate, and I started to escalate, and they started to escalate, and they started to escalate, and suddenly I was realizing I was losing the war, and the horse won. And I realized I was doing something wrong. And basically what it was my temper. And out of that came a philosophy that I live with now, and it's called premeditated anger. I had to, first of all, get a handle on my own life. I had to keep from losing my temper, and just in life in general. And the first milestone there happened at a restaurant. And I was people watching, and there was this table of about 11 or 12 people to my left. And they all acted like they came from a funeral. It was really quiet and just grumpy looking people. And as I was looking around later, all of a sudden I heard a huge commotion over here. I looked, and this lady stood up in front of a butler or a waiter, and she just verbally buttonholed this poor guy.
Wow.
I mean, the air turned blue. And within probably minutes, few minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, all of a sudden, well, first of all, the maitre d' or whoever he was came running across the room and tried to put out the fire. But then soon afterwards, every available staff member, whether they were from the kitchen or whether they were from the floor, were running plates to that table and complimentary drinks were being given. And I realized that anger had accomplished something good there. And that really kind of flew in the face of my desire to not be angry. A few years later, I was shoeing a horse. Her name was Eclipse. She was 11-year-old. She was a appendix registered quarter horse. She had a little bit of thoroughbred fire in her, and she had the size of a quarter horse. And I picked up her left front foot. And she was tied to, first of all, she was tied to a wall with a hard beam there. She had a thick rope, a bull snap, onto a webbed halter, and she was standing on pavement. And as I picked up that foot, she kept drawing it away from me. Now, this is an 11-year-old horse that, theoretically knows how to be shod. And I started to lose a little of my temper. And about the third or fourth time she did this, I really blew apart. And I hooted and I hollered. And I think I had probably had the pullers, the nail pullers in my hand. I slapped it against her neck, and all of a sudden I realized I'd lost my temper. And she froze. She was at the end of the rope. I could smell the cement where she had been scraping her feet. And I raised my hand up to her and put it on the side of her neck. I said, "It's okay, Eclipse. It's okay." And she took a little pressure off the rope. She's still wide-eyed. I picked up her foot, and I reset her shoe. I went to her back left, did the same thing, went to her back right. She started to pull it away from me, and I said, "Eclipse," and she froze. And I finished that shoe, and then I finished the last shoe. Again, anger had accomplished something. And I realized, okay, what can I learn from this? And what I really learned is when I see trouble brewing, I don't get mad. I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. And when I act big, not like I used to act big, but I do act big. But the moment the brat decides not to be the brat, I pour on the love. I tell them they are the best horse in the world. And that's part of building a good relationship, is learning not to lose your temper and to have premeditated anger. Because when you have an argument with a horse or a human being, and you just finish that argument, you finally shake hands, if you're angry, you can't go up to that person very easily and throw your arms around them and say, "Oh, I love you so much." You're so full of anger, it's hard for you to do something like that. But if you have premeditated anger, then you're able to turn off that anger instantly, or what looked like anger, and give that horse the respect it needs and the love for making the right decision to do what you wanted to do. The same as you give them positive reinforcement when the light turns on or when they overcome a fear. You give them positive reinforcement when the brat decides not to be the brat.
I think that's a great aha moment and a great story for all of us to use in several aspects, not just horses. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Horses teach us a lot how to be better human beings.
So I have a little inside scoop that you are ready to slow down and sort of pass the torch to, should I say, to a new equestrian. And you're going to be listing Harmony Mountain equines in the very soon future. So just tell us a little bit about what you're going to do after you pass the torch.
Well, first of all, let me say, we've just been so blessed to be here. Not only are we amongst a barn full of wonderful people, but we're in a community full of horse lovers. And then just a plethora of riding land that's available. and not just riding land, but ideal environments for training horses. Being especially next to DuPont Forest or right near DuPont Forest, the activity that takes place there helps you teach a horse to adjust to the real world, which is one of our obligations as human beings. But I think that age is starting to catch up on me a little bit. And both my wife and I've been doing this for 48 years. And it's time to slow down just a little bit more. And I'll never stop working horses or leaving. I'll never leave horses, but it's hard for me to keep up the pace that I've done with training in the past. And I've decided it's time for someone to take over figuratively the reins at a place like this. It's got a great reputation.
Yes, we're very well established and well known. So hopefully we can get the right buyer in here and let you move on to slowing down a little bit and hopefully staying in this area so we can still get some of your knowledge and wisdom. All right, so we have a little quick fire round, and I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions. Favorite horse breed to work with?
I think that it used to probably be a breed. I love the thoroughbreds. They're just full of electricity. They're just so intelligent. And if you can channel that energy into something productive, you've got a horse that doesn't give you 100%, they give you 110%. The trick is challenging the emotions of that horse. And it's so rewarding when you are able to do that, but it's difficult. In some respects, they're almost volatile. Not quite, but pretty close to being that way. I've come down to the conclusion that there's two types of horses I need, and they're not the breed. They're the personalities.
I love that.
When I went from traditional horsemanship to natural horsemanship, it was really hard to change. I had been in an area that I was really good at and made a good lifestyle at, and suddenly somebody was saying, "Hey, you're doing it wrong." And it was hard for me to say, "What do you mean I'm doing it wrong? Tell me how to do it right." I couldn't say that. I had too much pride, I think. But over a period of time, and it did eat away at me, I started to realize that natural horsemanship, it was so much better. It was so passive and so much less conflict with horses, and you felt so much better about yourself. And so I had to make big changes emotionally in my life through that process. I had to give up a lot of things, but I gained so much more in the process. When I work with a horse that has a chip on its shoulder, whether it's just because of the way God made it, or whether it's PTSD or whatever it is, and I break through that wall of resistance when the horse says, "You know, this really isn't so bad. I kind of like what you're doing here. This is good." Then I have a tremendous amount of respect for that horse because I went through the same thing. And I love those breakthroughs. To me, that's really rewarding when I know that I can bring a horse to the joy of life, in essence, that I've had by learning to be different, to learning to accept things that are different. The second type of horse I have a really soft spot for. Horses have so many different personalities, as many as us human beings are. And there are some people in this world that are so sensitive and so caring about other people or about life and so forth. But sometimes they're maybe misunderstood. They're kind of ignored or ostracized, perhaps. I don't know. There's horses that are like that. They have sensitive natures. They just innately want to hook up with you. Maybe not like a dog or a cat, but they do feel a draw toward a human being. But if they make a mistake, they've been beat up. They've been harshly abused and by being misunderstood. And these horses who started off with such a willing personality that are misunderstood by a human being that assumes that every mistake that the horse makes is because they're a brat. It's not because they're frightened, or it's not because they don't understand what the heck you're trying to tell them. They just, that traditional horseman thinks that that horse is just not working because it doesn't want to work. It's trying to be the decision maker.
Yeah.
And so they treat the horse harshly. And when I get a horse like that, and I start to discover how desperately some of these horses want to have peace with a human being, and I start to break through that barrier, then I love that horse. I mean, I love all horses, but that one right there, because once you open up that door, that horse just wants to be in your back pocket. And it gives you a tremendous sense of responsibility, because it's like a 6-year-old child that looks at you, that where the sun sets on your shoulders, and all of a sudden you realize they're starting to depend on you now for the answers that they never had when they had earlier. And when you see that horse start to develop, to me, I love that kind of a horse. And I don't care whether it's high energy or low energy.
Yeah.
It's the personality.
I love that. And your love for horses definitely shines through when you talk. So, bridle or bitless?
This kind of refers back to something I talked about earlier, and that is we have to strive to be more subtle communicators. If you look at two people that are in love, spouses, they walk into a room from an opposite angle and they never say a word. They can look at each other's faces and know exactly what's going on in their life. When you are phasing down from learning to use a bit as the main source of communication, which most people do, learning to go to leg and weight, which becomes another subtle way of doing it, to doing it with just weight, which is even more subtle communication in the saddle, then that's what we're striving for. Or on the ground, when you just look at a horse, and because they've committed a misdemeanor, and they say, "Oh, I did all right." Or if you look at a horse in another way, and they understand that that's a pleasing look, just as a good teacher will look at a student or with an evil eye or a good eye. You can do the same thing with horses on the ground. So in the saddle and on the ground, that's what you strive for. And when you go from a bitless if you can do it, if you can reach that kind of communication, it's great to go from a bridle to a bitless, but not many people can do that. And if you don't do it right, you're in a heck of a lot of danger.
Well, I hope everybody learned as much as I did today. I have a couple of cornbread questions for you before we wrap it up. And cornbread, sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Well, when you hear the word cornbread, what do you think of?
It reminds me of a person that I met. I'll try not to get too long-winded. He lived in a completely different era than you and I now live. His name was Gail. And when you and I had flush toilets, his family had outdoor privies.
Okay.
And he was telling me that one of the staples in life was cornbread and buttermilk. That's what they had. They had that out of necessity. It was a survival thing for them because they didn't have much more to eat other than that, maybe a few other things. But look how lucky we are now. We can go and say, which kind of cornbread do you like?
Exactly.
You like the spicy kind or you like the sweet kind? When do you eat cornbread? Oh, whenever I want, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I've done a lot of history since I started this podcast on cornbread, and it did originate out of necessity and availability of ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've learned.
So think how lucky we are. How lucky are we to be able to sit on a horse, not because we have to get from point A to B, because we have a passion for it. We're drawn to it. It's an extension of our life.
It is.
And those people, a lot of times, they didn't have that necessity of deciding whether they wanted spicy or savory.
Well, I hope that somebody changes their opinion on traditional horsemanship today just from listening to this podcast.
I do too.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Until next time, farewell, God bless y'all, and don't forget to thank a farmer.
If you're in love with horses, then you and I are the same. We've been a hostage to horses since the day we were born. We were born as a horse lover. Many of us could reach through a photo album and see memories of us wearing boots, hats, and riding stick horses. Meanwhile, our peers were wearing cowboy hats, stethoscopes, and looking to the stars. We were dreaming of dapple grays, winged horses, and riding the range. And finally, time gave way to our dreams, and we found ourselves face to face with two brown eyes, a muzzle, mane, and a tail. And that's when the fun began in the flurry of hoofbeats. We were cantering through hills, exploring hidden trails, solving countless problems in the saddle. We also started to explore an identity deep within our souls, a God-given gift called a horse lover. After galloping 1,000 miles or so and taking a few spills, we finally stopped and gazed into this magnificent beast's eyes and said, "What planet are you from?" And from that moment, the social dynamics between us and a horse changed. We slowed down a lot. We started wondering, what in the world makes this critter tick? And suddenly, we were the student and the horse was the teacher. As time went by, our instructor taught us a lot. We discovered that if we wanted to teach him English, we needed to understand horse. We learned about patience. We found out that anger made our problems worse. We discovered softer ways to resolve conflict. We learned about friendship. We learned about respect. And finally, we learned about love. Our affection for horses has taken us into their world, and because of those experiences, we've become more sensitive persons in our own world. Our Creator has used our attraction to horses, and He has made us better human beings.